Hello and welcome to this DCD talk on defending modern data centers. I'm Emma Strutton, I'm head of channels at DCD, and it's a pleasure to be joined by Ettiene who is the vice president at Axis Communications. So thanks so much for joining me today, Ettiene. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Emma?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for asking. So to start off with, are you able to tell me a little bit more about you, your role at Axis Communications, and your career journey so far?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been with Access for over 15 years. I've recently moved to Singapore as the Vice President for Access Communications APAC. Prior to that, I was living in Dubai for the past 10 years as a regional director, looking after about 71 countries. And then prior to that, I was living in South Africa, also with Access Communications, more in the engineering and training department. So quite a busy career within Access, very busy past 15 years. But I would say I've learned a lot, and I've come with a rich history and a rich background, and excited to see what is ahead, especially in APAC.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a really interesting journey, and as you said, such a growing market at the moment in Asia Pacific. So, this discussion is all around defending modern data centers, and data centers are, of course, evolving rapidly with AI workloads, high density environments. So, what are the most critical security risks that operators are facing today, and what's driving this shift?
I think if we look a little bit at it, the risks that we see today aren't entirely new. What has really changed is the value of what is being protected. So modern data centers today are carrying more critical infrastructure, more customer data, and of course, higher asset value than ever before. And definitely with the AI engines that we see today, the workloads, the density, the value, facilities are increasing, demand is increasing, and we also see that the clusters, AI clusters, can represent very large financial and operational exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. And when it comes to the physical security side of things, how are we seeing more sophisticated and coordinated physical intrusion attempts? How should operators be rethinking their defense strategies in response to this?
I think that we are seeing that the environment is becoming a little bit more complex, and so is, of course, the threat. And today, it's not just about force entry anymore, but operators need to really think about how do they approach social engineering, contract misuse, supply chain exposure, drone detection, risks, and attempts to exploit weak operational issues? Operational issues today take a majority of the concerns as well. We really have to understand that and to emphasize that beyond just the external threats, there's a lot of internal threats that we have to address as well. So first of all, attackers are becoming more patient. They may look for process weaknesses over time rather than really quickly or looking for an obvious breach. And I think the second part that's really important is they're looking at right at the surface, what can be exploited? Where are we expanding, and how can we look at people, processes, vendors, devices, networks, and procedures? So I think today, if we look at data centers as well as a whole, we have to really understand that it requires quite a different mindset. Things are changing at such a rapid pace over the past. Your processes may be 12 or 18 months old, needs to be refreshed constantly and at a very, very high speed. So operators should really design with the agility today, that they have to understand that the threats that we've had yesterday might not be the threats that we have to address tomorrow. They need to really understand that attackers are becoming a little bit more patient, they are more informed, their resources are much higher, and that the threats are becoming, as we said, more sophisticated. So this means we need to layer and protect many defenses. We have to make sure that we have strong contractor controls, as an example, secure device management, and make sure that we have a very clear and well-documented response processes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to those processes, in your view, what does a best-in-class perimeter defense strategy look like for modern data center campuses today?
I think it's a very good question. I think that we have to be cautious to just think that best in class is a product or a label. So today it is really about how do we become best at class right from the start. The strength would be to start with how secure is your design. And for data centers today, the more important question is, what is the right design principles? So we typically look at 4 areas that is very important. And the first, and to go over it very briefly, but the first part that we would always approach when we're planning for best in class or best design layouts is to really make sure that we have a layered detection zones. So not just the fence line, but the fence line becomes one layer. Operations becomes the second layer. Detection zones becomes the third and fourth layer. Vehicles, perimeter, building entry points, and more. So each layer needs its own rules and regulations, protection, detection, and making sure that we can optimize per layer. Secondly is the verification part of this, so that we really know that if our first approach is to understand the layers, the second part should be to have early detection and verification. And by saying that we're going after early verification, this means that we need to know what is happening per zone that we've layered, and that we are really quick in our response, that the videos, the analytics, the radar, for example, or thermal detection, those workflows are optimized to reduce false alarms. I think the third part is probably that everybody thinks when they think about security, especially physical security, is they think perimeter. But beyond a perimeter, we really need to understand that a modern strategy is typically where we look beyond the first layer, because we sometimes should expect that the first layer is the first one that will be breached. And your system becomes really smart on layer 2, 3, and 4, as an example. And then, of course, our last part is our cybersecurity security infrastructure. And here we look at access controllers, we look at cameras, we look at intercoms, we look at sensors and network entry points as well. And this is really to make sure that we have secure configuration, that we have patching, that we have a pre-post enduring risk policies, that we identify, that we can be able to segment a threat that when we see it, and that we form all of that should form part of our lifecycle management as well. So at what point do we stop supporting certain devices? What is the expected life cycle per device? And what do we do with that device while it is in life cycle as well?
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Ettiene. And when it comes to things like access control, these have long relied on traditional badges, biometrics. How are identity and access control management evolving in high security environments like data centers today?
I think badges and biometrics still play a large role, but they can't stand alone. So we really have to understand that we have to work across many technologies within security to make sure that we optimize the usage. So a badge tells you, for example, what credentials are presented. It doesn't always tell you who the person is, why they are there, what is expected from them. Are they in the right zone, as an example? And are they there at the right time? So by cross-using biometrics or the badges today with some high-end video security as well, as that we can really understand the purpose, the time zones that we give to certain employees or contractors in a certain space, and make sure that we are verifying that they have been in the zones that we've assigned to them, and that they are there within the time that we expect them to be there as well. So this means that specific questions, for example, is the person authorized today? Will they be authorized to be in a certain area today? Did they go to a certain area during that time as well? And to make sure that we're using, for example, video access control and biometrics to cross-verify the intent and the time that we've had with a contractor, for example, on site, or with a visitation that's taking place. So the movement of individuals within a certain space becomes really critical for us. And it's really an important layered approach that we go beyond just looking at certain biometrics or cards, but we link that technology with video as an example, or radar, or supplementing options as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose despite these advancements that you've just touched on, where do you see as the most common gaps and vulnerabilities in access management?
I think most of our access gaps are not caused by a lack of technology, but they're really by weak processes and weak discipline, and by adhering to these processes as well. So we have some very practical or very common issues that we often see on sites as well. So shared credentials as an example, tailgating, where 2 or 3 people walk in behind each other into a certain area. where we, for example, give contractors access, but we don't revoke the access quick enough. Or what we do is we don't review who has access on a regular basis. So in a high growth and high pace environment, these gaps build up rather quickly. A site might start really with strong principles, and they really try to adhere to how they gate who comes in and out of certain areas. But as they become busier, and maybe sometimes resources becomes a little bit stretched as well, you often see that contractors, vendors, operators, that they come in quite freely, and that we find it really inconsistent in the controls that are applied within these spaces. And then, of course, the second gap that we have is in the security and the security infrastructure that we see itself. So this is when we look at the cameras, the access control systems, and intercoms. And very often what happens is they have default credentials. So, for example, a default username or password. They have outdated firmware that isn't patched, that isn't verified and isn't updated. Or they are placed on very flat networks, and they become, of course, a huge part of the risk that we see today. So for operators, I would really focus on 5 practical actions and how can we bridge and how can we become a little bit stronger from this point of view. And this is to make sure that we all audit our access rights on a very regular basis. But we also have to make sure as we audit that we don't become a operational inefficiency within a gated environment. So we have to give access and revoke access on a rapid pace, but make sure that this is in a very verified environment, that we make sure that certain elements of our environment is segmented, that we secure it, that we patch and manage our devices within our life cycle, and that we really make sure that we have a physical and cyber team that knows how to respond when a threat or a breach is detected.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to that, do you think we're starting to see a shift from kind of reactive monitoring to predictive or preventative security models? And what does this look like in reality when it comes to the day-to-day operations of the data center?
Good question. And as we all see, and a big part of the amount of data centers and the need that we see today is, of course, very AI driven. And AI in video surveillance and in security and within technology is creating a huge amount of value. So we really see that it's helping us to reduce false alarms, that security teams now no longer have to just manage thousands or hundreds of alerts that are coming through on a daily basis. So they're becoming a little bit more focused. It's helping them to distinguish between what is a real threat, what needs a real action. And it, of course, gives them the opportunity to reduce their workloads and then improves their focus. The second part that we are seeing is that helps us quite a bit, especially for operators, is to really understand what has happened. So AI today can bring the right video and the right angle and the right moment to an operator really quickly. And a good example would be is that you can today do text search over video. So you can use the metadata and say, I'm looking for somebody with a red hat. And the video feed will be instructed to bring that person up or that incident up. So you no longer have to sit through hours and hours of verification, as an example. And the last part that I would say is that cameras and sensors today no longer just look after an incident. So, we typically use recordings or we use cameras to look at what went wrong. But today it helps us really to understand what is not normal, what has taken place. So if we have a certain flow or a certain time and scale that things are happening within a certain facility, we understand that people are typically moving in a certain direction at a certain time, and now they are not walking in that or moving in that direction. That gives us a different element within video, and we can analyze that, and we can be triggered or notified that in a very early stage. So we can understand that occupancy patterns are looking different. For example, workflow or stream flow or vehicle flow looks different. And this gives us a reason to react, to monitor, and to focus on the event to be able to support operations from that perspective as well.
Thank you, Etienne. And when it comes to privacy and data sovereignty regulations, you mentioned the Asia Pacific market in your introduction, and this can vary across markets like Singapore, Australia, Japan, Thailand. So, how can operators strike that balance between comprehensive surveillance and regulatory compliance?
It's a very good question, and I think it's a very important question, especially for a region like APAC, where we have each and every market with different expectations when it comes to personal data, biometrics, video retention, data residency, cross-border data movement. So it becomes a really complex environment, and there's no single document or process that is helping us to be efficient in all markets. So I think a single global template is, of course, it's the high goal, but each market behaves in a very different way. So we have to really understand that operators need a model that is really consistent. They need architecture that is able to adapt, and they need to really understand what is required per country when it comes to authorities as well. And first thing that we do is we typically work, because it is a very complex and a very heavy environment when we start looking at regulations across so many markets. So there are three principles that I would prioritize. And the first one is to minimize data. And this is really just to capture what is necessary, to retain it for as long as it's really needed, and to define clear access rights. So less data, who needs access to this, and why are we keeping this? And that's the first part. And the second part is the edge processing. And here we see where it's possible to process video and analytics on site, on the device, really quick, instead of moving a large amount of data across clouds or across countries and different technologies. So on the edge, really fast processing, minimize the data, and make sure that we only keep what we need. And then the third part is to really make sure that operators only look at data requirements that is secured by design. So we often say that the entire purpose should be is that the architecture of that is to be as secure from the start to the end. And here we look at in-country requirements as an example, but we also look at the whole security environment. So beyond just the camera, the biometric, or the access control, we really understand what is the purpose, what is the need, and how secure have I designed this as well. So to underpin this is really, it's all about cybersecurity. It's all about the network. It's really making sure that the access process has the right privacy controls, and to make sure that we only keep what we need for a certain period of time. So compliance doesn't become a constraint, but it becomes an important part of how we work with data centers today. And we don't expect regulations to thin either. We really expect us to ramp up a little bit more going forward. What we've also seen, it's a very complex environment that each and every country has a different regulation. So we need to make sure that we have some guiding principles as we approach the regulations across so many different markets, especially from my APAC perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Thank you, Ettiene. And I suppose looking ahead, how do you see physical security evolving from a protective function into visibility with operational intelligence and kind of business value as well for data center operators?
This is a very good question. I think this is busy happening now. The shift is taking place. So we see physical security as used to be viewed really as just a protective function. It is what I do post-incident. Cameras recorded incidents, for example, access control recorded entry and alarms and triggered responses. And this role is still, of course, very important because we need to understand what has happened. But today, I think that the entire design, the infrastructure, provides a much higher level of value. So today, for data center operators, we can really see that security devices are the source of operational data. So what we can do today is we can really look at how do we detect environmental risks, support compliance and reporting, and make sure that we improve contractor visibility. We can provide audit trails, for example, and understand really how people and assets have interacted and how do they move through a facility. So we often talk about the business value, and we see the business value into three main areas as well. And first is operational efficiency. So here we can talk about early detection, and you can look, for example, from thermal cameras and thermal sensors that can detect leaks, unusual sounds as an example. We can look at temperature that raises in certain units or that drops in certain units as well. And also make sure that we have we reduce our downtime, and we are looking at operations from a way more efficient perspective by enhancing technology as well. The second one is to really make sure that I would say that we really do the assurance part. And the assurance is that customers now understand that the processes that I have documented are usable. And this is, of course, we use nodes and we use a large amount of metadata. So we can really understand the flow of certain elements as well within my site. We can tag it and we can name it. We have that data as well. And this gives us a faster response rate, but it also gives us a system that gives us not just a visual part, but maybe an audio part as well. So I can interact with people at a much faster pace as well. And I think the last part is really important, that we have to understand that we can today look at one site and take the rules that we've applied to site one and duplicate that and make sure that we expand that across multiple sites at a much faster pace. So this gives you that multi-site configuration, for example, that architecture that you can deploy across not just one site, but one market, one country, making sure that you have a policy and procedure in place today with how you want to operate on site. And that can be documented, it can be really secured, and it can be pushed onto site as well. So what we are seeing today is that security is becoming not just post-event, but if you look at a pre-event approach as well, you really start looking at operational efficiency, and then you look at business intelligence, because what we are doing is we're looking at a large amount of data. And a large amount of data today is tagged. We use metadata, so we understand what the data is. We can name the data. And based on the named data that we have on hand, we can make some operational decisions or some business decisions. I'll give you a simple example. If you look at a small retailer might just look at a camera on a daily basis and say, I want to know at what time do I have the most people coming through my doors. And that visual evidence could give them a time and attendance schedule. Just by understanding how do they need to operate at a different scale, maybe they can enhance their operational efficiency by having more staff or less staff during a certain period of time. That visual evidence becomes really important, both in operations and in business intelligence, as an example.
Thank you, Ettiene. And to wrap up, what do you have any sort of final thoughts or key takeaways, for operators looking to strengthen their data center security strategy?
Yes, I would say there's 3 points. So the first one is to really look at your operating model to make sure it is as resilient as possible, and to really make sure that our operators today really look at our physical security elements, but also cybersecurity and facilities, and to make sure that we really try and look at what can we do to enhance operations and business intelligence. Secondly, we will say that we want to manage the security infrastructure. So leaders will treat cameras, access control, and intercoms as sensors, and they really know that these sensors are critical elements within their network. So what we want to do is we want to emphasize our lifecycle management, our patching, our segmentation, and really make sure that our sites are secure by configuration, by design, and right from the start. And third is our SOC or SOC readiness, making sure that the perimeter is still really important, but resilience today depends really on how quickly a team can detect, how quickly they can verify, escalate, and respond to, for example, perimeters or any threats that are detected. So that system on chip is really, really important to support many of our operators as well.
Thank you, Ettiene. Well, I will wrap it up there, but it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for joining me on this DCD talk.
Thank you, Emma. It's been a pleasure.